Issue 3, Around the World in 10 Minutes.
The world doesn't stop simply for the US election. Pope Francis this week divided his congregants when he offered support for homosexual civil unions. In France, President Emmanuel Macron advanced legislation to emphasize the secular foundations of the Fifth Republic. The moves follow last Friday's beheading of a Paris area teacher by a jihadist who was angered by the teacher's decision to show his class the famous Charlie Hebdo Prophet Muhammad cartoon. Finally, the EU recommenced trade talks with Britain after Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned he would terminate all talks absent greater EU impetus towards reaching a near-term agreement.
Ryan, which of those issues is most interesting to you and why?
I think that Brexit happening is very, very important. I think that what happens with the UK as far as what kind of deal they get with a full Brexit with trade goes will impact voters in other countries who are also looking at a possible exit from the EU, namely Italy, which has elections coming up not next year but the year after, and the insurgent Lega Party and the Brothers of Italy Party, which are national populist right-wing parties, are in first and third place in their respective polls.
Okay, Clarence, do you believe that the situation with President Macron and France is as serious as he would present, this battle between secularism and political Islam? He would say it's a crisis of epic proportions. Your take?
This is a long-running issue, and I find it fascinating because France has what a lot of Americans say they want: colorblind government policy. You know, liberté, égalité, fraternité. They don't even count by race in their census, and they think that's a good thing. But I've talked to French Africans in particular who don't find it's good because their communities, you don't have a good way to measure problems like health problems, police problems, etc. And those are serious issues there. Yeah, this whole issue about being able to wear your headscarf in public or in schools, public facilities and all. In America, we don't have that issue, you know, land of the free, so to speak. And so every time this sort of thing happens, and these are terrible tragedies on both sides, attacks with knives on people who are Muslims and non-Muslims. Every time this happens, a big debate ensues. Somehow the Republic survives. I suspect it'll survive this one. But they've got to have a lot more dialogue among themselves, just like we Americans do.
Pat, this speaks to a lot of issues that you've written about in your books. Your take on the situation in France?
Well, what we're seeing is the downside of diversity. I think my view has always been, and it disagrees with a lot of thinkers, is that diversity brings with it to a country enormous problems if it's racial, cultural, religious, ethnic, and in many cases it tears them apart. We saw Yugoslavia fall apart into 7 countries, the Soviet Union into 15 countries. Let's take Macron in France. Huntington talked about bloody borders and a clash of civilization. All you need is a 1% or 0.1% of your Islamic population being Islamist. I think you're going to get more and more of this, and we're going to have to live with it. It's a natural result, quite frankly, of the breakup of all the old European empires and the peoples of the colonies in the third world coming to replace the populations there. This is one of the greatest issues of the century.
Eleanor, your take?
Well, Pat just delivered the message that they're coming to take over your culture. No, they're there, and they want to be part of your culture. And France has not done a very good job in integrating people from Africa and Muslims into French society. And they're basically cordoned off into neighborhoods. And in this country, we used to call that segregation. We still have a lot of de facto, I guess, segregation in this country. So I don't want to sound like we've found the better way. But I think adjusting to changing populations is what countries are going to have to do. And you need leaders who acknowledge reality.
Ryan, when you look at the Pope's comments in terms of prospective gay marriage, it's been interesting to see the degree to which Christian conservatives in the United States have really, pushed back against that. Do you see?
Well, the Pope's comments were made on a documentary which has not been seen very widely, and according to the Pope and the Vatican, it was edited and taken out of context, and the Vatican has not changed their position whatsoever on gay marriage. I mean, if you're not Catholic and you're not a practicing Catholic, the Pope really has very limited ability to change church doctrine, very little, if at all. It happens over a long period of time, and I really, besides usurism, I can't really think of a major point of church doctrine that has really changed much over time. This problem with this Pope is he really likes to be popular and say things that are popular, but he misses orthodoxy. He loses orthodoxy in those comments. So I wouldn't take it to heart. I don't think that it means very much because it will change nothing as far as what the orthodoxy or the catechism say.
Pat, your thoughts on that quickly?
Ryan is correct in terms of morality and of the homosexuality. The Pope cannot change the teachings of the Catholic Church, and he did not. What he is talking about here is how to deal with the problem in society, because the existence of homosexuality is much, much broader than it was, and these unions are taking place. And how do we find some path to make it, the least divisive to handle it? But in my judgment, this Pope makes a terrible mistake because he gets into these issues which divide the church, and he does it repeatedly, again and again. But I don't know how it helps the unity of the Catholic Church to keep doing this, because he deliberately antagonizes traditionalist Catholics.
Eleanor, one of the things we saw this week was the comments by the FBI director, the director of national intelligence, that Russia is again interfering, got voter rolls. Is this a call to arms? Is this a call for sanctions or some other measure immediately to say stop before election day?
I just have to address the Catholic question. The Pope is talking to a lot of Catholics who Pat would not define as traditionalists, and he's talking to a world outside of the Catholic Church. And he wants the Catholic Church to come across as a welcoming place for people who are now legally married in many societies and where civil unions are accepted. So he's on the right broad path to the future, even if he ruffles some feathers among traditionalists. So did Pope John Paul, and his reforms took root. In terms of what you were just asking about Russia interference, it would be nice if the president would tell Vladimir Putin to lay off. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think, again, a little over a week until Election Day, you're going to have this administration stand up and slap sanctions. I don't think that's the answer. I think it's awareness and getting the message out that a lot of what you are getting on the internet is, to use Joe Biden's word, malarkey.
Okay, Clarence, your thoughts on that issue of Russia, seemingly not terribly concerned about sanctions?
Yeah, well, I think, well, first of all, I know the Trump administration would point out that they have raised sanctions several times against Russia during Trump's administration. That's what he was talking about last night when or Thursday night when he talked about nobody's been tougher on Russia than me. But the fact is, I would just like to see what would happen if the Russians were sending out propaganda and disinformation that favored Joe Biden. Would Donald Trump be any more scrupulous and determined to get to the bottom of it and to issue punishment? I just wonder.
Okay, Pat, do you think this Russia issue is exaggerated? That, when I saw the press conference, I was thinking it would be, we've seen an effort to actually hack into polling devices and change tallies. Is it as big a deal as was presented?
No, I don't think so. It was initially back in 2016. People were very much taken with it. But as Trump said, Russia, 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 it comes up constantly.
Eleanor, do you want to respond to that?
It's from Russia with love.
All right. So Ryan, to cap us off here, China, did you think that, I was suspecting that there would be more questions in the debate about broader issues with China beyond, this domestic component, South China Sea, trade, etc. Were you shocked by the absence of pushing on that?
I was shocked by the absence also not only of that, but of a single question about Afghanistan. I mean, we've had 1 million questions on race in America now in these 3 debates that we have with the vice presidency and the presidency. not one question on the longest war in American history. And yet a longer context about China. I think that it would have been worth the moderator asking Joe Biden if he regrets normalizing trade relations with China and talking about what that has had, how that has impacted the country. I mean, right now we live in a much different country than we did before trade normalization happened, where the Midwest has gotten profusely poorer. You're talking about death rates are up, suicides up, jobs are down in a number of these areas because of trade relations with China. I think that should have definitely been brought up and how that relates to the American voter, and not just in a competition of he said, she said.
Okay, Clarence, we've got about 30 seconds left.
And opiate addiction rates are up too. Ryan is right. We always miss some of these really big issues because of lack of time or because there's more heat around certain issues like race in this particular year of racial reckoning. But I remember Joe Biden was an early advocate of dividing Afghanistan into different tribal provinces. I still kind of like the idea, but I don't know if we'd even be able to help them get organized that much. It's still a complicated issue.